A beautiful day out there, and I know everybody would like to hear what we have. Okay, well, I know everybody would like to hear what we have to say, but you'd also like to get out of here because it's such a pretty day. So, I'd like to introduce myself first. I'm Linda Aller from Bennett & Williams. If you haven't heard me speak before at one of these public meetings, we're going to be presenting on the things that you see up there today. We're going to be talking about the results and the update on the testing for all you people that let us test your water. We're going to be talking about immediately through treatment systems, and then we're going to talk about where there are water lines and where there aren't. And then the township is going to be talking that they're thinking about doing in the future. So, yeah. So, if you had your water tested, you had me and Cayman Goose Tree, who's going to be speaking today, out there shivering, taking your samples. You might remember that because a lot of wear coats because they're not 100% cotton when we were taking those samples. So we have fond memories. And Carrie Zawiski, everybody likes to listen to her because she speaks with a British accent. And I can't compete with that, so I just leave it at that. What we'd like to do, this is our tie-up meeting, kind of like the end of our project. So I wanted to thank everybody that gave us the opportunity to do this for you. And I would like to start with Montgomery County. They hold our contract. And so if I can get the Montgomery County people to stand up. And everybody, yes. Okay, and then if I can get you to introduce yourselves, Matt, we'll start with you.
Can you repeat that, please?
Matt Hilliard, Director of Environmental Services.
I'm Charlie Schaefer. I'm the Chief Sanitary Engineer for Montgomery County Environmental Services.
Tiffany Petrie in the Utility Support Project Management Office.
Megan O'Leary on Communications for Environmental Services.
I want to. Were great to work with. They kept us on our toes and kept us on time. We are, and how grateful you should be to live in Montgomery County. Project would not have been possible also without the township trustees and the people from Butler Township. So we also wanted to take the opportunity to thank them. And so now it's you guys' turn to stand up.
I'm like time trustee.
Bryce Jackson, Township Trustee.
And I'm Erica Vogel, I'm the Township Administrator.
And I want to tell you how nice it was. I'm sure these guys got really tired because we had Zoom meetings every month to keep us on track, talk about what we were doing, et cetera. But they were always on the Zoom meetings and always very helpful to us. So, all right. So my thank you then. So there's just my little words. We really did enjoy a lot of you out there. And so this is kind of meant to be the funny thing, but also the heartfelt thank you. And that is some of you hid your sampling things in the forest, so we couldn't find them and had trouble. Others of you had your sampling points right out there, so it was really easy for us. Some of you sample still attached to your private water system, some of your hydrants. Some of your sampling points were a little bit different. And then we pointed out to a couple of you that you didn't have an outside faucet that worked anymore because it froze. And you were kind enough if you didn't have an outside faucet that worked to let us into your house. And typically we were headed to your bathroom so we could sample your tub where it didn't have an aerator on it. And we really appreciate the fact, especially the one person who woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning because their outside faucet was frozen. We really appreciated the fact that everybody was gracious and let us in. So I kind of call this OL. So some of you where were your wells? Some of you, you just left them right out in the middle of your yard so we could find them. Some of you were a little bit more innovative, okay? They were incorporated into your landscape. Some of and bigger fake rocks. And even bigger fake rocks. And I had no idea there was even such a thing as a fake rock, let alone that came in all different sizes. Charlie says, well, yeah, well, you should have it. And some of you, if you couldn't find fake rocks, piled up rocks around your well. Okay? We just loved it. Every minute of it. Some of you put them behind fences, decorative or other. You hid them under bushes, and you were kind enough to all where they were. And others of you hid them in places we would never have found them. It is under that bush. Yeah, find that one. Else. So you made them look like a well. Some of you had a bucket, just in case your casing failed. Some of you painted them red. Apparently there are kits that come in red, but some buckets and some not. And then this was the unique one, the windmill. And so if you see yours represented, it was because we liked them. We couldn't put them all here, but we just wanted to say thank you. So, all right, that's my thank you. All right, so now to the meat of this. Just to remind you that the sampling area from where we took everybody's samples was the pink area that was defined by the Ohio Department of Health. The map was created jointly by Ohio EPA and the Department of Health. And then I put up the one on the other side, on the right side there, so that you could really see that that pink area goes from Old Springfield over to Clyde, Dogleg, and Frederick. So you kind of know where it is. And that's just a little bit where Frederick branches at Meeker there. Okay, so that was the areas that were sampled. So, okay. We sampled 5 locations. So 155 of you signed up with the survey. 200 were eligible. So that's over half, and that's a pretty good return. We sampled for 18 perfluorinated compounds. There stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and PFAS is the word that takes all of them in. So if you've heard the presentation before, there may be as many as like 1,200 of them out there. We're sampling for 18 of them, the ones that have been studied the most and the ones that are the most stable forms. So the good news is 85 of the locations that we tested didn't have any PFAS, not one of the 18. And maybe that's some of you. 2 of the locations that we sampled exceeded the Ohio EPA action level of 70 parts per trillion for either PFOA or PFOS or the 2 added together. So 2 were exceeding the action level that we had talked about in previous meetings. We went out and resampled those, and one of those still exceeded and the other one popped just below. But the bad news is 68 of you still had detection. We're all below Ohio EPA action levels, but they're there. And these are all man-made compounds. We actually found different ones. You can kind of see here. So these are the maximum concentrations in anybody's well. Not everybody had all of them. Some of you had more than one, some of you had 3 or 4, but nobody had all 7. And I just wanted to give you an idea of what those numbers look like. You can see that one PFOA one is 172 all by itself. And that was the one that even when we retested it, still clipped that 70 number that's the Ohio action level. Okay, so kind of where did we find them? Well, we sampled these roads. We sampled all of Antioch School, and then you can see here, we out of Old Springfield and north of Kirshner. And the first column says the number of locations that we sampled. So that's the number that we sampled on that road. And then the next column is the number of locations that had a detection of at least 1. And everybody always asks me, okay, so where does it come from? Can't tell you, I don't know. I did have a guy call me up he said, you know what you did, right? I said, what's that? He said, well, my neighbors don't like me anymore. I said, well, why that? He says, well, they're one on each side of me. And they have stuff in their well and I don't. So now they don't want to talk to me anymore. And that's how it goes. And that it kind of depends on where the cracks are in the rock. Depends on whether you're going to have it in your well or not. So, to an idea of the things that we found. So, if you've heard us talk before, these PFAS numbers have just been going down. So, in 2009, US EPA thought that maybe 400 parts per trillion for PFOA and 200 parts per trillion of PFAS was safe based on health and risk and what was known at the time. By 2016, the 70 number that you heard us talk about a lot was out there, and it kind of stayed there for a while. Ohio EPA adopted that 70 and then a couple other numbers for 5 other PFAS. And Ohio EPA lowered one of those numbers for GenX and PFBS in 2022 when there was some new health data out there. But in June last year, the US EPA said, hey, we're going to introduce these new numbers. They're going down a lot, even more. And they went so low, they went to 0.004 from 70 to 0.004 parts per trillion, which is really 4 parts per. And the labs can't even detect that low unless they do a special thing, which they're not doing right now. The point that EPA tried to make was even sometimes when you can't detect these, maybe they could affect your health. Okay, and they picked that number based on our real health risk number for children that won't develop an antibody for vaccines if they have more than a certain amount in their blood and they make some fancy calculations. So they also said that these other 2 chemicals were going to help numbers, and they put those out in June. And we thought, because the next thing that was supposed to come, these were health advisories. They're non-enforceable. In theory, they don't ever apply to your private well. They always only apply to public systems, but everybody uses them as a benchmark in their private wells because you don't want to be exposed to something that could harm your health. So US EPA promised, and we thought we would have prior to sending you your results, what's called an MCL, or at least a draft MCL, for some PFAS, particularly PFOS and PFOA, those 2 that have been studied for a long time. When they did their December 31st deadline, he couldn't tell you what was going on. So March 14th, finally the US EPA put out what's called draft proposed MCL. So MCLs are different and that they're regulatory. They'll be regulatory if they're passed for any public water system. So they won't be allowed to put out water that has PFAS greater than these numbers if they're adopted. Okay, so if. So they went from 70 to 4 for PFOA and PFOS. And then they said that, well, hey, we need to add these concentrations of these 4 other ones together, because if you have them all, it's worse than just having one. So they invented something for an MCL this time called a hazard index. It's very common. It's used in toxicological studies all the time. And they did these health-based concentrations. And if you have the 4 of those added together and they exceed 1 after you do the calculation, then you would exceed a health index. And it's the same thing as exceeding an MCL if you're a public water system. Okay. The other thing that they said is they've got this MCLG. So MCL, enforceable, G meaning goal, which means it's not enforceable. And they really just said PFOS and PFOA should be 0. You just shouldn't have any. Okay, so what does all this really mean? Well, US EPA proposes these rules. If they're adopted, they're only they are regulatory, but they're not advisory this time. You know, public water systems can't deliver. They will have to sample for them regularly, which they don't now. US EPA takes comments on these rules that are out. US EPA can make changes, they can change the numbers, people can give them different data. But US EPA has indicated that they're gonna adopt something they think by December this year. My guess is not so much, more like maybe June or July of next year. But if US EPA adopts the rules, and it looks like they will in some form, they'll only apply again to public systems, not privates, but it's the same thing. We use them because they're health-based for guidance for what we'd like to do with our private water systems. So then somebody asked me, well, okay, so if those numbers hold, if those four and the hazard index holds, and we looked at the sampling results from all your houses, well, what would it mean? Well, it would mean that 34 of you would have exceeded these proposed MCLs for either PFOA or PFAS. And if you were one of those people, you will either have received or be getting a letter from the township that says that, because it's another piece of information that you might want to consider. It doesn't require you to do anything. Exceed the hazard index. Okay, same thing, you would have gotten a letter that says you will have exceeded one or two of these. It's just so that you know the latest numbers that are out there. You may want to do something, you may not want to do something, but now you've got the information. So let's suppose you'd like to do something. Okay, so what is it that you can do? Are there treatment systems that you can in your house? And at this point, I get to sit down, introduce Cayman Newstreet, who's a geologist with us. Like I said, he was out there with me freezing, and he's going to tell you all about things that are posted on the website already.
Well, she kind of introduced me, but my name is Cayman Newstreet. I work with Bennett Williams. I'm a geologist for them. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. You guys offered us water and hot coffee, hot chocolate when we were there. One of you guys offered us coats because we were shivering so bad when it was 18 degrees and windy. And many of you invited us in your house. So for that, we're very grateful. But here for today, we're going to talk about water filtration. And before I start, I'm going to reference the contingency plan you can find on the Butler Township website today. If you go over to the right-hand side, the community information tab, pop down to the water contamination issue, and you'll see that fourth bullet point for additional resources in the contingency plan. If you haven't already looked at that, you're going to find a lot of information about water filtering and bottled water in there. But today I'm going to talk to you about what kind of water filters remove PFAS. How do you know if your filter removes PFAS? Why maintenance is so important? Who can install your water filter? And then I'll tell you a little bit about bottled water at the end. So, like I promised, what kind of filters remove PFAS? Granular activated carbon and reverse osmosis. On the left, you'll see a under the sink unit that's probably no more than 20 inches tall to give you some scale. And once you move some trash bags and some cleaning supplies under your sink, I'm sure you'll find a home for there. And on the right is a whole house reverse osmosis unit. And those can get pretty expensive, like $5,000 to $10,000 after you spend all of your the pre and post. And black tanks in the middle are probably about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, just to give you a sense of scale for that picture. I'm going to talk more about those later, but for now, I don't want to know what my thing. What's critical, as you understand, is that not all GAC is going to remove PFAS. If you want to be positive that you're going to remove PFAS, the National Sanitation Foundation and the American National Standard Institute teamed up to make standards for drinking water filters to approve of them removing certain contaminants. And NSF/ANSI standard 53-2022, as of Monday, April 11th, they approved some new language and added some more PFAS compounds to the standard 53 drinking water treatment. Find that on their website, and their chart is very difficult to read. So in the contingency plan, I've summarized all of their units on this. You'll find the price for the initial unit, and then how much a filter replacement will cost and how long that filter will last. Because what you really need to know is how much water you use, and how often you're gonna need to change the filters, but we're gonna go into that a little bit more detail here soon. That bottom bullet point is et al. 2020. That's Nicholas Herbert and his colleagues from the University of North Carolina and Duke University tested 73 private residences. They took 2 samples per house. They sampled the incoming raw water for 6 perchlorinated compounds, then they sampled the filtered water. And they found 3 things. The first thing they found was at the top of that bullet, or at the top of this slide, is not all granulated activated carbon will remove PFAS. Second thing they found is all reverse osmosis will remove PFAS. And the third thing is, I think, is most important, and it's if you don't maintain your filter, it's not going to remove PFAS. After its life cycle, every filter has a life cycle. So it might be good for 6 months or for 300 gallons of water. It might be good for 3 months or 200 gallons of water. Once you hit that time span or that the amount of water goes through that filter, you need to replace it or you're going to have PFAS breakthrough. It's no longer going to be filtering. And Perkert found in some cases that if it wasn't properly maintained, you'd increase the concentrations of PFAS through the filter of raw water. And so what you'd be doing is you're paying for a filter to increase the concentrations of PFAS in your water if you don't maintain it. And that's what not any of us are here to do. So we're all going to properly maintain our filter if we buy it. And at the end of the 6 months or the 300 gallons, we get rid of it and we throw it in the trash, or we replace the membrane and the reverse osmosis unit so we can have clean drinking water, because nobody wants to pay to increase the concentrations of the chemicals in the water. You'll see hand cost up here. I just want to tell you that you can get a water pitcher filter for granular activated carbon for about $20. That's certified by the NSF standard 53. And but that $20 water filter is only good for about 20 gallons of water before you need to replace the filter. So on the contingency plan, you'll find a thorough list of water filters, how much the upfront cost is, where they can be installed in your house, whether it's under the sink, screw into the fridge, or screw into your sink directly. You need to just kind of think about how much water you drink as a household and decide what is going to be most cost effective for you and how often you're going to need to replace the filter for what you buy. I can't answer that question for you. That's something you guys need to figure out for yourselves. But all that information is available on the Butler Township website on the contingency plan. So enough about GAC for a minute. We're going to talk about reverse osmosis. And I think everybody wants to forget about the osmosis lesson from middle school that we all failed. But I'm going to remind you guys real quick. Osmosis is just the movement or the diffusion of a solvent through a semi-permeable membrane that's got little tiny pores or little holes in it. So the water can flow through. And in this example, there's salt water on the other side. The fresh water diffuses until the concentrations of pressure are equal on those 2 sides. And that's essentially what osmosis is. It just doesn't allow those contaminants to cross that semi-permeable membrane. It just allows the water to flow through. And if you guess that reverse osmosis is just the opposite, you'd be right. You apply pressure to the contaminated side. In this case, it's the salt water not going through and only allowing fresh water through. In your case, it'll be the contaminated PFAS water that's not allowed through, and we only send fresh water through. And wastewater is discarded down the drain for now. On the right, you'll see microfiltration, ultra or infiltration, or reverse osmosis. I just put this up here because it's very important that you guys understand a microfiltration filter is very different from a reverse osmosis filter. Microfiltration will not get what reverse osmosis gets, not even nanofiltration. Reverse osmosis only allows water through the filter, and that has the advantage being that all RO is going to remove PFAS and other contaminants from your water, which is a great thing. Disadvantage is RO is going to remove healthy minerals from water, and it typically requires pre and post filtration. I put that second bullet point in there just so you guys know if you buy a reverse osmosis unit, there's going to be additional costs than just the reverse osmosis unit itself. A lot of you guys already have water softeners, so you can take that cost out of it, but you're going to need a sediment filter and other filters that go along with this RO unit to make it function more effective. What's not up here is it takes 1 minute to produce 2 to 3 ounces of reverse osmosis water. And that would take several minutes to fill up an 8-ounce glass of drinking water at your sink. So typically people buy a storage tank that's always full so you can go up and fill up your glass of water whenever you're ready. I just want to let you guys know because there's just additional costs that if you call someone who's selling you an RO unit, well, you might think is tacking on, but they're necessary to help the RO unit function as is. And the most important disadvantage up here is Ardo produces up to 4 gallons of wastewater for every gallon of clean drinking water. So that means for every 5 gallons of water you pull in, you clean 1 gallon of water of that, but you leave the PFAS behind in that 4 gallons of water. So you increase the concentrations of this wastewater. This wastewater is then flushed into your septic tank. Your septic tank releases it into your drain field. And from your drain field, that concentrated PFAS water percolates through the soil, or in your case, limestone rock, into the groundwater. And you've now increased the concentration of your well field or in the area next to your well and increased the potential to draw in higher contaminated PFAS water. But hypothetically, if you have reverse osmosis, it's not your problem. You're cleaning that drinking water and your reverse osmosis system can handle it. It's just something you ought to be aware of, as opposed to GAC, where at the end of its life cycle, you throw it away, it gets taken to a landfill, and those contaminants are no longer near your well. So it's just something to consider. Where can I install an RO unit? Well, you can install a point of entry. This picture on the left is in Naples, Florida. And I need to tell you that if you go with a point of entry unit, you need to have a registered private water systems contractor install it. And we're going to go into more detail and everything else that goes into that. But the point of entry systems are generally much more expensive. And on the right, you will see a reverse osmosis unit under the sink. And there's that storage tank underneath. You're not required to have a registered professional install this. However, some companies do recommend it because it requires some knowledge of plumbing. And people have hooked up their filters in the past where it's actually not filtering any of the water. And they paid for a filter that they hooked up wrong. So it's just something to think about, or just read the instructions thoroughly and follow them. So now we're on to granular activated carbon. This is just a high porosity material with a large surface area, typically made of different types of coal, wood, peat, or coconut shells. And it works by essentially attracting and holding on to the PFAS and other contaminants in those big pore spaces that you see. Right. Everybody always kind of wants to know what carbon looks like. So if you look on the left, there's a quarter for scale. They're really, really tiny pellets that you'll never see them because they'll be packed away in the water filter. And on the right, you'll see this microscopic image of granular activated carbon. I think it's so cool just to see that hexagonal structure. You can imagine how deep those go and how much more surface area there is for those contaminants to grab onto. So where can I install a GAC unit? Well, you can install at the point of entry. Again, I'm going to touch on it here in a couple of slides. You need a registered private water system contractor to install your point of entry unit, or you can install one yourself. And install is a loose word because if you just go buy the $20 water pitcher, you just have to remember to fill it up so you have water ready to drink when you want it. Or in the contingency plan, there's 2 water filters that screw into the fridge. I believe one of them is $55 and the other is for sale for $60. So if you already have the fridge, that's the initial investment, and now you have a $60 water filter. I don't quite remember what the life cycle is, but it's on the contingency plan. And then on the right, you have under the sink filter that, again, that's no more than 2 feet tall and fits under most sinks once you move kind of some stuff around. And same thing with the reverse osmosis. Some companies do recommend a professional install it just so you get the plumbing correct. Also supposed to remind you that not all granular activated carbon removes water filters. So you want to make sure that you check the contingency plan and you get one that's certified by NSF and ANSI 53. Water filter. If you're going to go with whole house or point of entry, here it is. It requires a permit and must be installed by a registered private water systems contractor registered with the health department. Point of entry filters also require a plumbing permit and plumbing inspection. It's also, the plumber needs to be registered with Montgomery County. So you probably have a lot of questions. Best people to consult for your water filter question are going to be the person you're buying the water filter from and the person that's installing it or a registered contractor. They deal with this stuff all the time and they'll be able to answer lots and lots of your questions. But if you're going to go with point of use, it's not required you do not require a permit or a registered private water systems contractor to install. But again, it can be a little difficult because you're dealing with plumbing. So maybe some of you want to hire a professional installer. Where does bottled water come from? Bottled water usually labels where it comes from on the bottle. If you're ever nerdy enough to kind of read the bottled water, it'll say well water and maybe it'll say spring water. If it says well water, it just came from an aquifer underground. If it says spring water, it came from surface water. But generally, bottled water companies just buy their water from municipalities and either bottle it as it is and have a label on it and sell it. Or they'll sometimes clean it and remineralize it with minerals they like, so they get that same consistent taste regardless of what aquifer they pull it out of. They can sell it all over the world, and Dasani always tastes like Dasani. So bottled water PFAS free. Well, Stephen Chow in 2021 for Johns Hopkins University found PFAS. And on that graph that no one can probably read in here, there's 3 really high bars, and those 3 really high bars are the only ones that go to 5 parts per trillion of total PFAS. I just put that in there to show you that 36 of these detections were very, very small amounts of PFAS in those incidents. And you also see in Consumer Reports 2020, higher percentage here, 32 of 35 non-carbonated water bottles detected PFAS, but 30 also worth noting, this has been 12 carbonated water, 11 detected PFAS. But no, my brand bottled water has PFAS. I cannot sit up here and answer that question for you, but I can tell you that there's no requirements to test bottled water for PFAS. But some companies do test once a year and post it on their website of what they found. They'll test for more than just PFAS and they'll share all that data. And some companies will test and they don't test for PFAS. So you can find all this information on the contingency plan on the Butler Township website is summarized there on whether they don't treat their bottled water at all. So the takeaway here is most bottled water is not treated with RO or GAC, and it's not very well regulated. So I can't tell you what bottled water to buy, but I can tell you who cleans their water before they sell it to you. And all this information and more can be found on the contingency plan on the Butler Township website. But now I get to pass the microphone off to Carrie, who's going to talk about engineering stuff.
Can I ask? Just on the zoning, I understood that.
I believe Dasani filters with either reverse osmosis or drain reactivated carbonate.
So it doesn't matter if it's what or not, it's.
Yeah, so even if they do buy it from you without doing something to it.
Okay.
Brings sound fascinating.
I'm not, yeah, around them. Think a little bit about,
What's your option? Let's go back and take a look at your recommended sampling area in the pink. We're gonna look at this area in some detail. So if your house is in that area and you want to kind of find yourself in that area, we're gonna move from one map to another and you'll be able to kind of follow where you are. The one thing I do want to say, be very, very clear about. You have the choice to keep your well. There is nobody, not here, not in the government, that can tell you you must give up your well. Okay, so that's the first thing. You do not have to connect public water. If you are happy with a well and whatever treatment you decide to put on, if you need anything, you may continue to use them. Okay. Live in this area probably are aware that the jurisdictional in this recommended well sampling area are a little disconnected, perhaps, shall we say. So the gray areas are unincorporated Butler Township. The turquoise areas with vertical lines, that's where the city of Union is. Vandalia is down on the bottom right corner, and they're like a pinky maroon color, and they have a diagonal hash on them, just so you can kind of locate them. And then Dayton is blue with diagonal lines. So just keep in mind what jurisdictions everyone's in. It can make it. Let's try and find out what public water is currently available in the area. So what you can see on here is that City of Union lines are in yellow. So they're running along Old Springfield Road, they're coming down Dogleg and Union Air Park, and a little bit along Jackson. Vandalia, their current water actually ends right at the edge of my map on the east side. But in 2023, they're going to be installing the lines that are in pale pink
on this map. And those are going to be installed and supplying water to properties in that by about September of 2023. And then here in 2024, they're installing 2 lines that are into the recommended sampling area. They're in a bright dark pink on this map. And those will be supplying water by September of 2020. Dayton lines are on the outskirts of this area and they're shown in. So what does this actually mean? I mean, it's nice that the public water running all over the place. 2 of those 288 addresses that we sampled, well, that are in the area, are currently adjacent to public water. So there is an option. And if that's something you would be interested in because you are currently along one of those lines, you just need to get in contact with the jurisdiction that's in charge of that road. Thing to remember, this line from Union that runs along Martindale and down Frederick Pike runs past Forward. It was put in using funding from Ohio EPA. It was a loan forgiveness program through Ohio EPA. And Butler Township has agreed to reimburse anybody that wants to hook into that line. If you live on Martindale or Frederick, they will reimburse your tap fees. It's about $1,000. The other thing is that Union has agreed not to require annexation along that line. Okay, I don't know what they would want to run on other lines. That's a question for the city of Union, if that's what you want to look into. There are about 146 in this area that are not currently adjacent to public water lines. Streets without public water, areas that people couldn't hook into public. And without going into great detail, there's about 24,000 linear feet of piping that would need to be installed to provide public water to everybody if that is something that the community decides they want to do. And that minimum estimated day is somewhere on the order of 4 million. So not a small number. Okay. Now it's all very well if you decide to hook into public water. One of your questions should be, well, is water cleaner than mine, right? I mean, you're going to hook into something, you want to know what quality you're getting. So is that the city of Union was sampled in 2020 by Ohio EPA for they were non-detect for the 6 PFAS compounds that Ohio EPA sampled. And the same is true of the city of Vandalia. They were also in the city of Dayton, things are a little bit more complicated. You might know that they actually have 2 candy plants, and it does not detect any PFAS. And this happens to be the plant that provides water to the area north of the Dayton city center. So up here in Butler Township. It does have detections of PFAS and PFHXS. And they are aware of the problem, and yes, they do exceed the MCMs. So Dayton is looking at ways. So Dayton tests every month for PFAS because they have a known problem. But all 3 of these systems, I think it's a load of them. How many are they doing? 29 PFAS over the course of the next 3. So there will be some more data available to you, but as of right now, the water that's available to you in any of these 3 public systems. Considerations here. Just because there's public water outside doesn't mean you have to come in, and you can always choose to keep your well. And people have a lot of reasons for choosing to go with public water or not. While the utility would typically cover in down the road, you would be responsible as a property owner for running a line from their meter to your house. And so if your house is set a long way off the road, that could be a long stretch and usually dependent in part on the length of the line that you need to install. So local plumbers will be your best resource for an estimate. There's also a tap fee or a connection fee. Every water utility will have slight change over time, so none of this is fixed forever. Utilities can choose to increase it as their costs increase. If you hook into public water, you will also be dealing with a monthly water bill, which of course, if you're a well user, you're not used to dealing with, but you will pay that to the local water provider. So the more water you use, the more you get charged. And there are also personal considerations, and I am not here to dissect anyone's motives or try and persuade you one way or the other. But just whatever happens, and as you move through this process as a community, no one's going to force you to connect to public water. If you feel comfortable with, that's fine. Okay. So with that, pleasure of handing this over to Erica and see you from that perspective and maybe tell you what's next.
You all for coming out, and I want to also thank the county from the township trustees for all their assistance through this project. It has been a great learning experience, I think, for everybody, and has been just really good. And then, of course, with Linda and Carrie and came in, they've been a great company to work with. I also, when we were sitting here, members mark water says that it's purified by reverse osmosis. There you go. The township's goal through this whole process, along with the county, has been to ensure that you all receive the tools you need to make an educated decision and decide what is best for you. And along with that, all the things we talked about, obviously your testing results, the health effects information that's on the website, the contingency plan that Eamon spoke of. Again, just reminding you, you don't have to do anything if you choose not to do anything. The township trustees recently authorized me to develop a program to continue testing. So the citizen advisory area, which is the blue area, will be offered testing here shortly. And then we will also, with that, residents in the pink area who may have not tested before, to have their well tested at that time. That will take a little bit of time to develop, and we've got to get quotes on testing and from the consultant, but we want to go forward. All of this information and data was wonderful, gave us a good insight of what the level of the issue we're dealing with. And we want to continue to do the same thing for the additional residents. So we will be doing that. Following testing, we want to provide those results to all the residents in the testing area. And then provide a survey to see, what the intention is of the residents. And we don't need to know specific addresses or anything like that. But we just want to know what your intent is as far as, connecting to public water, if there would be a desire in the future to connect to public water, or, if you put in a treatment system. And we did a similar survey before we entered into the agreement with the county, and got a lot of good information for that. But now I think, people getting the results and knowing a lot more than we did at that time, it'll be a good opportunity for us to get some more feedback. So then, as always, as projects develop, as things continue to change in the northern area, we'll continue to try to work with our neighboring jurisdictions to hopefully keep you all in the township if we can, and provide water if that is the direction and desire of the residents and the trustees in the adjacent communities. So, we will look at those options as we go along through this. And just hopefully continue to partner with all of them. That's all I had. Obviously, we're gonna open it up to questions, and I don't know how you guys want to do that. Any questions, but I'm probably not gonna answer the engineering ones.
I have two concerns. Number one, incumbent on every resident realize and understand that this problem was caused by the people that we elected to represent us. North of us is probably the cause. We don't know that for sure, but I would think that the township and the trustees of the township would be interested in finding out the source of this contamination. I've done a lot of research regarding PFAS. Even 1 trillion you don't want in your body because it will kill you eventually. I want to know what the township is going to do. It's my understanding that reverse osmosis is the only filtration system that will remove PFAS from your water. I think there's an English company called Berkey that has a filter for homes that might be able to. I've asked the question. I've sent emails to the company in England to try to get a feel for exactly what the Berkey filter will do. But again, it's not a mass filtration system. I worry about taking showers and baths. We don't cook with our water. We don't drink our water. And I want to know what the township is going to do. You've given us a lot of information as far as what we can do on our own to protect our health. I want to know what the township is going to do because they were part and parcel of the problem.
When you say the township was part and parcel, we,
you know, many of the residents in Butler Township, especially northern Butler Township, we opposed the annexation that went on. And it was, you know, it was done without people's knowledge. So don't stand there and let that be an issue.
yeah, so the annexations, I mean, as a township, unfortunately, townships have no control over annexations when it comes to a property owner wanting to annex to a city. If a resident chose to do that.
This is an old story.
Yes.
We've been there many.
Well, the Ohio Revised Code actually.
Yeah, John Applegate, you think, he never gave us anything. He's exactly right. These meetings are a waste of time. It's just more, well, you guys can pay for this, you can pay for that. You know? 10 years.
I pray that they don't.
We can ask. Don't do anything. John Applegate had to have approval to move Jackson. You guys. We asked for some certain things after maybe a call that maybe something, no, we can't get anything. Oh, we can't do nothing to John Applegate. He can do anything he wants to do, nothing we can do to him. But you gave him approval for that, so you should have used that for leverage. That's just one example. It's just getting old.
Yeah.
He's
Unfortunately,
we've gotten that unfortunate. So what are we here for? To tell us we need to wait for somebody to put $4 million line that we're not going to get. Got an annex.
Don't really want. We want our water clean.
yeah, no,
We gotta get something done. Stop all these things. This is the way.
I definitely understand your frustrations about.
No, you don't understand. You only get your cup of water. You might understand it then. Let your kids drink it. So we all know the state airport has done this too. The lady from the told me it was. The guy on the phone told me it was, and they called me back and said, we're sorry, we're not supposed to tell you that. We should have never told you that the airport was responsible for that. So how about making somebody else come and pay for all this? Pay for $1,000 of cost motion. You know, pay for our line for that. Oh, if you got houses this far back, it's gonna cost you more money. I mean, come on, we're already losing our house values. from the buildings, so we're getting hit from buildings. 10,000 trucks up down the streets. Every ghetto thug from whatever side of town driving up down the road, that nobody ever does anything about. And on top of that, now we got poison water. You don't understand,
Position.
unless you live out there, you don't.
We have a rental property that was supposed to help pay for our retirement. Now we're gonna have to put in 2 different water systems because we can't rent that house out to somebody who's got children or anybody really because of the water. What does Butler Township do for
All
us?
you're down the
Anybody that's west of the airport access road, you guys have written all of us off.
There's a lot of frustration in this room. And there are a lot of concerns and things that we do want to hear. I want to say though, that for this meeting moving forward, I would request that we operate with respect, please. And with a capacity for us to hear one another and have a conversation.
Has anyone been disrespectful today?
I think we need to have the conversation.
You don't respect people.
Yes, sir.
You're right in, you're putting up with the county meetings. Got one thing done, you can, but some else, hey, look, you take your milk for free, you got food water. I've been drinking a bottle of water, now it's down this side of the worst thing, I've got. Yeah, I think it's not a lot of work, you got made. Totally it's done. If we're looking that way, so. So let's say the people that don't have the water right going down our street, when are we gonna get a chance to look at the city water? How long?
Yeah, I can't answer that right now. I mean, I've spoken with the city of Vandalia. You know, I think both are willing to look at those options in the future and possibly work with us. I mean, Union has, you know, they have a lot of development going on and obviously that's their first priority. But as a township, we do not have, we're not a water purveyor. Townships are ruled by nature. We don't have public water facilities. And so the short answer to that is we don't have control over that, but we can work and assist with the adjacent jurisdictions to provide water.
Who pays for all the water on it?
City of Union.
Tips man for it.
Well, City of Union on most of them. I mean, there's some Dayton development up there too.
The city of Union paid for the all center to get water because they tested.
So- Yes. Yes. By EPA, it was
So we did that for the rest of Frederick.
and in the future, I mean, we don't really know what the possibilities of that is.
That's for you guys, are the ones that are supposed to know how to do things.
Yeah, so we will continue to look into those things. As a township, we can't request funding because we're not a public water purveyor. So we would have to work with the county or Dayton or Union or Vandalia in order to provide that.
Right. So I
so,
look for Frederick,
yes.
we need to pretty good. Got one down here. But It just didn't run it across to the rest of Frederick, which I found weird, but he did run it all the way down to the Alden Center.
Yeah.
How bad was there water at the Alden?
It's back.
I mean, we should want to see it.
Yeah, because they're a public facility and they have. Yes, so that's why EPA funded that water line. Now that was approximately 2 million, is that right, Carrie? It was approximately 2 million to run that water line. Since that water line has been ran across Martindale and south on Frederick, we've had no residents that have taken advantage of the connection.
I swear I saw pictures, because I need to tell where they took it to the house.
We've had none, we had Polgrove's Church.
Martin, I swear I saw where they took it.
Yeah, they put in, Union did allow the connection, like they put in it at each property. So that when somebody wanted to connect, that they could connect,
But nobody had.
but nobody has taken advantage of it.
Why can't we get funding for? Just a quick calculation. 44 homes, 5,000. 5,000, that's way cheaper than 4. We're still talking a lot of money, but. Should have. I mean, why?
And I don't know if grants like that would become available in the future. I don't know.
I mean, like, it's just. Yes. Activated carbon filtration system is pretty cost a minute, but I know little kids, and we had over. Because we're just above the road, and I don't know why we did. We did. Different compounds. When we did our test, which all wood tests, what prompted our family to say, ooh, you know, it's worth the $400 water test. We don't want cancer, we got it, and we had a shitload of feedback, so we were really glad to be tested. So we got the whole home activated carbon, but it cost $5,000. We just, oh, yeah, that's installed. Then we have to replace the filter, $750 a year. And you have to get your water retested just to make sure that the PFAS is coming out. So it's more like $1,100 a year is your investment cost on that. Our water stays fantastic. It's clean, so I think it's worth it. But that. I think like $4 million of water line, plus everybody has to pay their, you know, the metering fee. I like having control water, because I feel like you can't really trust that it's gonna be taken care of otherwise, so I like having control.
You can buy Dayton water anywhere? No, is it a separate name?
Montgomery County buys state water. Union has their own system and Vandalia has their own system. Okay.
Did a little bit of research today, Google, and I think we're getting our wrong, well, we need some additional information. Nobody from the county can tell us where this contamination came from. Do not know. Sir, nobody from the county, is there any other PFAS contamination in Montgomery County? Where?
So north of Dayton, the water field, it's right north of Dayton, it's a show.
Okay. I suspect that the problem is with the Dayton Airport, and I looked up on Google today, and I just want to read a few things.
If you don't mind just keeping it to questions, I mean, there's gonna be a lot of people, I think, that have questions in the room. And.
Would you guys like to know?
Yes.
Who's contaminated as well?
Yes.
Fire suppression PFAS containing products were developed with stringent performance requirements issued by the U.S. Navy. The fire suppressant products were so effective they were adopted by all branches of the military throughout the 1970s, as well as many civilian operators. The FAA was to issue security requirements for airports to exclusively use PFAS containing products as their fire extinguishing solution around the same time. This is in the 70s, folks. Although research in the Navy Research Laboratory independently ascertained potential hazards of these chemicals might present to humans during the 1970s, the public was not made aware of this until 1998, following a couple of trials. In an extensive nationwide study conducted by EWG, water wells around dozens of commercial airports tested a concentration PFAS easily in excess of the minimum EPA safety guideline of 70 parts per trillion. Most airports in the U.S. haven't even begun testing water sources, potential contaminants, and EPA current regulations regarding PFAS are considered to be very lax. This is just two sites that I found as soon as I Googled it. It's been there for a month to read long. FAA regulations forcing them to use PFAS containing products are cited by airport representatives as a defense in the dozens of litigation trials that business is currently involved with. So the FAA required the airports to use aqueous solution to fight fires. So maybe Dayton's the cause of our situation, that the FAA and the EPA are behind it. Real quick, trying to get to this. So you guys might like to know. At airports, AFFF, that's what the aqueous solution is deployed intentionally for either training, testing, operational requirements, or emergency response. It may also be accidentally released during delivery, transfer, and storage. Wastewater contamination with AFFF was often treated like stormwater and was allowed to seep into soil or was discharged as surface water runoff. Storage tanks and drums containing AFFF do sometimes leak, and in this case, can release PFAS into the subsurface. PFAS and PFAS contamination will migrate downward within the soil column. If the mass is great enough, it can migrate and contaminate groundwater. Contamination groundwater can reach sensitive receptors by being extracted by drinking water wells or by recharging surface water features such as rivers or creeks. In both instances, the PFAS become part of the food chain by being ingested by humans and wildlife. So it stands to reason airports across the country are being tested for PFAS contamination, and it's likely to be contributing to PFAS contamination in the vicinity of the airport. It's also finding that all the contamination in Montgomery County is west of the airport. Although the presence and extent of potential environmental impact depends on the nature and history of past AFF use, at each airport, the AFF has been mandated at airports across the nation, and consequently PFAS contamination being found during environmental investigation at many of these airports. A total of 524 airports across the U.S. required by the FAA to use AFFF, and all can be considered suspect for PFAS contamination. Airports are still required by law. Airports are not required by law to investigate PFAS contamination. Still, there are more than 75 lawsuits across the country against entities that have discharged the foam containing PFAS, and the number is growing. Congress is urging FAA to allow airports to use PFAS-free foams. However, the FAA has been slow to respond, and the timeline for action is unclear. Past firefighting training, equipment, and storage practices at airports have left behind years of built-up legacy contamination, the extent of which only is being determined now. So I don't know about you all, but maybe barking up the wrong tree. I'm going to be contacting Mike Turner and JD Vance to see if they can do something about it. Because the FAA and the EPA is making the airport use that stuff because it's the most effective way to put out a fire.
Right, but what about the icing that's they use more often?
The icing doesn't have.
You might- you might say that.
And I appreciate you talking about the development around here, and that's something that I wonder too. Replace farm ground with roofs, concrete, asphalt, and retention ponds. What does that do to the groundwater below it? It either makes it worse or it makes it better. One of the two.
Sammy Hill, any other questions? Okay.
Number one. We're on First Street. Was that in the advisory area? I think it was.
It's
I thought we were. On First Street. And then since we have two theologians here, here's my other question that I've been wanting for a while. It was brought up about all these warehouses being built. You have all this heavy equipment, all of, everything going on. I mean, we're getting pushed out left and right. But all this heavy equipment, all the moving of the earth, what does that do to the foundation? Will that change the way the PFAS runs? Will it make more cracks? I mean, what does that do for we? This,
Okay, so the answer is, I can't answer your question,
okay,
but I can tell you that, I'm not familiar with what they're doing at every site. What you do have on the high ground here is, remember, if you've heard me talk before, the airport and a lot of the land sits high. On one side is the Miami River, on the other side is Stillwater, and so, everybody knows you kind of go down like this, so where you have shallow rock, and in some places it's pretty shallow, if they're digging into the rock, then maybe you can change flow patterns or take away what little protection you have at the top. Okay, but not necessarily. If they're blasting because they're setting pilings and foundations, that can add to cracks or crevices or change the way they go. But if they're not doing that, then that wouldn't have any effect. So I imagine them, I don't know how they've been constructing these things, so I can't really answer it. Okay, but one thing I want to tell you, everything that you read in the things about firefighting foam are all true, except it's not EPA that made, it was the FAA that made the air firefighting foam. And they made them follow what was called the mil spec that was made by the federal government. And they did that because in the old days, nobody had any idea that PFAS were an issue, okay? But they did know that they would put out fires quickly and save a lot of lives. So I won't tell you how many contaminants that we have been. Something that was a degreaser and it got in your water. Because you couldn't clean it up. Science is wonderful, okay? There's already a bunch of things out there that people are working on. PFAS have the strongest bond known to man, okay? There's new mil specs. The federal government won't allow PFAS to be used anymore, okay? Except in certain situations like aircraft carriers, etc., where if you have a fire, it's an immediate problem and a bunch of you are going to die. They're coming up with new things that don't have PFAS in them, but PFAS have that great property is they're a long, skinny compound that one end of it likes water and the other end of it hates it. So they stand up like this, like little guard people, and that is what forms the film, and that's what smothers the fires. And that's what made them so effective. If you're a firefighter and you wear gear, when you see your firefighters in gear, they're full of PFAS. Firefighters have the highest cancer rate of any job anymore. That's because they're either exposed to it by breathing it, but they never had any idea it was in their gear. And I've heard firefighters give talks about how I took my gear and put it on my little kid and took the picture. That they would have done it, or they just slept in exposed, and a lot of them were dying young of cancer. So all the things that we did in the past that we didn't know, okay, we're trying to fix them as a society. Okay, and there's no doubt that airports where they did fire training or fire training areas, some of your townships had fire training areas where they practiced with foam. I've heard people talk about how they live next door to a fire training area, and when the firefighters used to go away, they used to run out and play with foam when they were kids. Okay, I mean, if you've seen this foam, it looks like fun if you're a kid. It's flat and tall, and no one had any idea. So a lot of the things that you see now, because they're very mobile when they get in the water, they tend to move. There are some places in Minnesota where the plume goes for 10 miles from the place that it started. But you have to remember that PFAS come from a lot of places, that it's not all put it on the ground and get it in your water. I work on a site that I've worked on for 20 years for PFAS when I couldn't even get samples tested in the United States. I had to send them to Canada. because nobody had a method to test them. And we learned it not only came through the ground, but it also came through the air. Arctic. Now, every time it rains, we actually rain enough that it meets those 4 parts per quadrillion of PFOA almost anywhere in the world. So I understand your frustration. I understand that science is slow, but really this kind of just made the headlines and the world of real people. About in 1997, when North Carolina had a problem around their Fayetteville plant that DuPont had where they manufactured things, and they put it out the stacks there too. It started, the first study that anybody knew about was Parkersburg, West Virginia. Here, and again, they dumped it in the river, put it out the stacks. And I've dealt with a lot of people that had concentrations of 1,300 parts per trillion in their wells. Okay, I deal with a public water system that has had concentrations as high as 22,000 parts per trillion in their wells. I mean, you guys had 2 that tripped 70 parts per trillion. Okay, but these numbers keep going down. Okay, and this is a really big class of perfluorinated compounds, and we've only studied maybe 2 of them for the last 15 years. So all this new stuff, it should make it makes the paper every day. People ask me, well, can I get it through my skin? Do I really need a house, something that takes it out of the water in my whole house, or can I just put it on my faucet? And I said, well, there's not a lot of studies yet that tell you that it's going to go through your skin. But if you ask me personally, for what I've seen in the last 20 years, when you take a shower and you make it hot, what do? You open up every pore in your body. So if it even has a chance of coming in, I think a shower would be like the worst place, or the bathtub. And I suspect it didn't used to be in breast milk. Now it's in breast milk. And I suspect that as our technology gets better and there's more studies, we will see that it will affect all of us. Your single biggest exposure is drinking water. So if you can get it out of your drinking water, you take your biggest exposure away, but it's in everything. Okay, and it comes from other industries. Somebody else here had a question.
Our numbers around here, you're saying are low compared to other places you see.
Yeah, compared to some of them, yes. If you live around a manufacturing plant, if you want to look up on the internet, you want to look up Hoosick Falls, New York, or the Washington Works plant down along the Ohio River, okay, Parkersburg, West Virginia, Fayetteville, North Carolina, at the 3M plant, and then look at what the water is around Oakwood, Minnesota. If you want to look at, I mean, I can go on. There's a map that the Environmental Working Group puts out. Look up EWG.org on the web. And they've mapped all these places where there's contamination across the country. That's the reason you heard Carrie mention this UCMR, which is going to require all these public water systems to test for perfluorinated compounds when they never tested before. Okay, so it's what they call an emerging contaminant. There's all these things that are being done in a PFAS roadmap. Look up US EPA PFAS roadmap. And all these things are happening, and they're happening so fast, you can't keep track of them. Okay, I mean, even if you read for a month, oh, I laughed when I heard you say read for a month. It's like, oh no, you have to read at least for 6 or 9 because there's so much out there. Yeah, you have a question.
Yeah, I've got a couple of observations. Linda, I love you like a sister, but I don't think anybody's gonna go home tonight saying, man, at least it's not as bad as someplace else.
No,
Right?
I agree.
And I don't think that's what you're saying. So I'd like to focus us back on what do we need as a township, some ideas. Okay. One of the things I want to point out is 1/3 of our trustees isn't in this room. I don't know where she's at. That's fine. She has a life. But my guess is to hundreds of people in this community, this is the #1 problem that's been going on. I'd like to say kudos to Mike and Bryce and Book, back here, but they're the newest trustees. Nothing was being done on this until these guys sat down in those seats. Now,
don't get too pumped up on it.
Oh, I know you're on.
You know where I'm going.
I'm getting the butt right now.
So these guys sat down in that seat in January, and here it is April, right? 16 months later, and we're finding out about what? 155 wells? What the hell? So that's my question. What takes so long? Okay, why aren't we doing some things in parallel? For example, my guess is our trustees and Erica probably knew sometime along, there was some communication going on behind the scenes saying, there isn't really much. We need to have a couple alternatives, specific alternatives, not just go research, Dan, go research it or whatever, and come up with a plan. But here's the three options, and we're prepared to fund these things. And why isn't the county doing something more aggressive than saying, yeah, we'll make this happen, and saying, we've got the funding and we can get the 75 of these houses or 100 houses or whatever. But we need a contingency plan put together that does things in parallel, not just throws it over the wall, waits for the county, and then the county throws it back and now it waits for somebody else to do something. So we need more parallel activity. We need more trustee involvement. Beating up Missy tonight. I know if she's not here, that's a bad thing for me to beat up somebody who isn't here, but it's obvious. And I think since I don't see anybody taking notes, I think everybody here should take notes. Our trustees need to be at the front of this thing. And two of them have been, and I know that for a personal fact. I'm not sure if Missy's been involved or what degree. And I know Eric, we need more. We need fast. Linda, do you know, was the EPA Superfund site up on Frederick Garland Road? Has that been even tested around there? Or any?
That's north of where we were this time. And
We're close enough. Okay.
this particular study only looked at the pink area. Okay.
So why don't the county jump in and say, hey, we know better, let's go drill some wells and test that, instead of waiting for a contractor and all the negotiations and contracting and stuff. Take some leadership, county, for God's sakes. Okay, that would help. Even if it's just a rule of
I
that.
will tell you this, I will tell you how expensive this is, even like to do the testing. Okay, I think most people are familiar if they need bacteria tested in their water, or they want a couple other little things, but this particular test is very expensive, and 93 people in your area, or these were made available to them for free. To say, yeah, I'm not, you know this, okay, but it's not. If you're talking about drilling wells and whatever, you know, it's a substantial amount of money. And I'm not going to defend Montgomery County or anybody else, but the people who track contamination are normally the Ohio EPA. Okay, so they're the ones that have control over the waters of the state. They're the ones that
Your point is a good point.
they're the ones that
EPA
US EPA or the Ohio EPA, they're the ones that step out around those Superfund sites. They're the ones that are responsible for seeing that tests are taken if they think they need to be, if they have the authority around airports or other places.
The ones that can drive that train are either in this or downtown county headquarters, who can drive that train and say, we need to get the EPA in here. Do something. Here's a conception. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm the one guy here who thinks this. Nobody outside this room gives a shit. Excuse my language. But it doesn't feel like, no, that's not true. I know that because I know Mike, I know Bryson, I know Erica, but they can't, it's like pushing a noodle probably at some point in time to get other people to share the urgency around this. I mean, you heard some people here talking about 10 years of that. Well, unfortunately, I don't know how long you've been here, Erica, but these two guys haven't been sitting in these seats for 10 years. So it's not totally fair to beat them up for what happened or didn't happen before that. But back on the contingency plan, here's an area of concern of mine. My well tested clean, probably many people did. But I might sell my house one day. The only thing that people remember is all that press. Remember that? All that press we got in the Daily News saying, oh my God, these people, all their wells are contaminated, whatever it was. What is our leadership in the township going to do to set that record straight? This is, frankly, and for anybody affected, I apologize, but this is encouraging news for a lot of us who live here that says, okay, it is limited. It's like, that's encouraging news. That should be out there. What's the next step for testing our wells? You just going to one and done?
Or you're gonna come back to my house next year and test my well, and the next year, maybe some 5-year plan says, we're gonna test these same wells. Or some other wells, but every year we'll come back and do that. Some contingency that says, we're not just gonna have, don't steal your line, we're not just gonna have another meeting in 7 months.
Well, that's
So so go, Mike.
one thing that's been a challenge through this whole thing is they keep bouncing that number around. If it had been at 70, we only had 2 people.
But we could be filing suit against Dayton.
Yes,
Why not? They filed against the airport.
yes.
Let's go after them. If nothing else, it goes.
They control the airport, they should reimburse the people for the reverse osmosis or whatever it takes to remediate the problem.
Whatever the outcome is, it's different, but let's do something.
Are you saying to do that as a plan of action too from the residents? Or do you want the township to pay for it?
I think the township,
Well, problem is with that is we're only got 300 some people, the other people can be pissed with the money.
I don't know, my suspicion is some of those people would be concerned that, hey, I'd like a township stands up for something that's wrong.
I know,
So,
but
if
I'm
it's-
talking to like, I'm the same, you know, where. I'm right to vote with everybody. And that number, the way it's, they're saying to go lower. I mean, but the other problem is, yeah, we could come and run to get the water lines ran, but is everybody willing to get annexed?
Yeah.
That's another problem we're trying to work through. And that doesn't happen overnight either, as you know. I mean, and we're dealing with John Gate.
Like I said, don't lose sight of the fact that kudos to you guys.
I know, it's
Probably in the ground running.
It's a daily thing that we're working with. It just, there's a lot of work happening that nobody sees right now.
To answer your legal question, I mean, we did look into that and we consulted legal to see if there was anything we could do. And because we don't have a public water system, we're not impacted. Like, we're not the ones that can file suit.
So what about?
But the citizens can, right?
Yeah, right, class actions too.
And they're
What
all.
if you have a meeting, it's like leadership? Bring somebody in who can educate all of us on a class action. What we have to do is, because I bet you get twice as many people in the room saying, I'm on board with that. And
And that's something that the citizens can put together. Legally, as a township, we can't do that.
And we were trying to get all this data before we went down that rabbit hole.
yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm just concerned we're going down into.
Well, the other thing that I think is gonna happen, kind of back to some of your, that I think that once they keep lowering these numbers, everybody's gonna fail. But there gotta be some funding that'll be helping somewhere. It just might not be there today. I mean, that number just came out, that 4 just came out, what, 2 weeks ago?
20, it came out to 20.
That's why we're waiting for that number before the meeting. We didn't know where we were at.
I bet you could also speak to Tara and find out where they got theirs, talk to that vendor, and he says, hey, if I can sell 200 units in your community.
That's where it is.
I'm gonna cut the price in half, do something. Do
So
something.
I'm with her, I've talked to you before, but I want to control it because I don't know if I trust the other water. You know, saying at this point, I want to know I control my water.
My numbers are on there. There's. However. That's what I wanted to discuss. If the county or the township is willing to pay $1,000 tax fee. Conversely, if the county or the township also pay $1,000 towards an annual system. Like that's like it's a big, like if you have $1,000.
You do that right now, the biggest thing is says we're gonna use a lot of the ARPA funds that we had left for the admin fee. But the thing is, when it's an individual one, so there's 3, everybody in here, obviously, everybody is, if it's not your backyard, I'm not worried about it, right? You know, we're all first. The other residents, what are we doing for them? They're gonna see us spending this money. We're working on something like that.
Yeah.
So we just don't have that answer yet.
That's something we'll look into if we're able to do that with some of those funds.
It sounds like he wouldn't be able to do a tap and, you know, I'm all that I got mine already, but I would take $1,000 tap. You know, people that are way far out, that's like, even.
I wanted to find out, did all you people get, if it tested positive, everybody.
So that's the angle that I would like to come from is help on that if we figured out what was grants unavailable.
I
Okay, to drive out.
But I gotta say, to be honest with you.
I know, but
we're gonna run-
Yeah.
It's organization, which I don't think anybody wants to do that. We're either bringing the other units. Hey, you know, so if you're not, then you gotta run your line. Well, if it's for my house, it'd be about 15, 20,000. And then, so I mean, where did, and then how many people to sign up for it, pay for it? You're not gonna get them to run those lines if we got 10 people to do it. So there's a lot going on here that, you know, that we're trying to fight through. Biggest thing we're trying to do is get the data gathered and make some wise decisions to keep getting everybody involved and hearing from people, hearing from the rest. You know, because that's all we can do. And then as money comes available, we're gonna, I mean, I would love to be able to see us be able to pay for the workshop system, whatever it's out. And then, you know, to restore their property values. My whole goal in getting involved in this whole project was trying to keep people's property values paid. And it give them the option to tie in or whatever, then they can make their own decision. But at least give them that opportunity to be able to keep that property value.
I know you had said about last season, but on Frederick, we're in both those roads, they have been digging for sewer lines and water. Does that have any effect on this?
Sometimes when people are getting ready to put in sewer lines, and particularly if they're digging in rock and they're digging deep into rock, they'll do studies, they'll require studies ahead of time. I don't know whether any of those projects required there to be studies ahead of time to see if they change flow or if usually they do them because they're afraid they're gonna make something's well go dry. But I've done those studies for water companies, so, but I don't know whether those were done this time or not.
Well, since you don't want problems, right, I don't know if everybody here. Health and the malls thing that. Well, they did 21 wells there. And he's had that well in his house forever, the same guy dug the 21 wells, basically. And now he's got to dig a new well because he said that.
There is laws in the state of Ohio that if you're the one that takes water away from somebody else, that you have to replace. It's a study or a court case called American versus Klein versus American Aggregates. It was a 1988 court decision that actually changed the water law in the state of Ohio. So in that case, it was a quarry and they were dewatering, and then everybody around them that had shallow wells, they all went dry. And so that actually changed the water law. So now the law is that if you endanger somebody's private well by your actions, then you must replace their water supply if you cause a detriment to them. So I don't know whether that helps or not. But like, yep.
So yeah, I got just a quick practical comment. Sounds like not too many people are interested in hooking up to municipal water, but one consideration. I don't know what's water, but more than likely, I think I'm gonna say this, more than likely, if you do hook up, you will also have to pay to have your existing well sealed, unless you meet certain requirements. According to the Ohio Administrative Code, I've got.
Okay, so if you have a private well and you hook up to public water, you have to physically disconnect your plumbing from the house, okay? If you want to keep your well, like to water your garden, wash your car, things like that, it's perfectly legal as long as you maintain the well and it doesn't share any, there's a physical air gap disconnection, but you may not ever run it into the house again. Okay, you can't like put a backflow prevention device in, it doesn't work. You have to physically disconnect it. You can keep your well as you use it and maintain it. If you don't, you must abandon because it becomes a source of potential contamination into the aquifer for everybody else. That answer?
Well, yeah, I guess you have a more optimistic reading of the law than I do.
No, I chaired the committee that went through it.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
They cannot make you abandon it unless it creates a conduit for contamination and you haven't maintained it. Okay, that is true.
Township got a grant to run the water lines from Union down to Allwood. Wasn't a condition of that grant
that you did not have to meet?
Refunded.
Yeah, it wasn't our grant. The EPA, the City of Union, EPA worked with the City of Union to get that water line installed. So they did fund it. And so in turn, we said, well, if it's being paid for by EPA, City of Union should not be able to come along and say, you have to annex your property if you're gonna connect. And Union agreed with that, and they agreed with the township and said, okay, anybody can connect along that line without the requirement of annexation. Now, we don't necessarily have the same scenario in the other areas, like Old Springfield and different areas where Union has paid for that water line.
How about like going from? Would those then be eligible for each line there? Under the same conditions that they can then stay residents of the township?
If it was funded by a grant from EPA or something like that, I would certainly hope so, and that would be the desire.
If Union pays for the water line,
I have a question for this as a whole. I think we talked about all of these various systems, water systems. We've talked about the water line. We've talked about the need for accountability for various entities that are in this area. So I just kind of as a show of hands, if you guys wouldn't mind, just for our understanding. Obviously, this is why we talked about the need for a survey. Is because we do want to hear from you. We do want to serve you well as we try to make decisions for what we're going to do moving forward. If hypothetically, this is not something that is before you tonight, but if there was the option of entering into a class action lawsuit of some kind, by a show of hands, who would be willing or thinking about entertaining something along those lines? Okay. This is about 20 hands in this room. By a show of hands, for those of you, if you had access to some sort of public water and were able to stay within the township, how many of you would consider that a viable option by a show of hands? Knowing that you would still be required to do a tap-in fee at least. So I think,
well, we pay the tap and they have to run line.
okay, you'd have to run a line, but then we work with the tap-in. 6 or 7 hands. And then I think generally speaking, everyone outside of those few hands that went up for public water would be in favor of some kind of carbon or reverse osmosis system, correct?
Be in favor of it if they had to get annexed to get water.
Just as we think of our decisions, we do want to, and we do understand that a lot of this stuff is not fair.
Well, and just so you know, Bryce. And Bryce's family is on Persia. So we're living in the same situation, so we're not saying, hey, we go down the road, you later. Yeah, at least we're talking.
Water lines run a certain amount of way. Union State, Mandan, we're still in that gray area, we're not looking at getting.
Well, so the only way for no annexation would be that if we said that's not a feasible building, feasible situation, talk about taking 10 years to never happen. That would
So water south of my 70 is state water.
Dayton or County.
County, that's why we're going south of.
We've looked at funding of all ways to get city water there. And the cheapest way to do it is obviously to tie in with all the other municipalities, but how are the municipalities going to play? And then the other thing, we're going to, I mean, we're going to have the water done into it. Because they're not going to run it. You know, they're going to run $5 million water line for people.
I have a question in the back.
Yeah, maybe you said something at the beginning, because. It was. I didn't get one.
Okay.
We've passed it above.
No, that's not true.
No.
That's not true. I would send them to you again. They all went out either in December or everything was out by the first week of January. So if you didn't get it and I had an email, I'll pull up the computer and went to the right place, just a second, if it went to the right place, and if it didn't, I'll send it to you again, or if you don't have an email, we mail them to you. So a lot of people, I have had 4 other people that said they didn't get their results, and that's, I think, because they went to their spam, but they won't be in your spam anymore from December, okay? So
The first method would have been email.
if you gave us an email, they would have been emailed to you. If we didn't.
If you were one of those 36 people that are now under the proposed MCL, the 4, you would have just received a letter this week.
Yeah, today, actually.
Okay, very good. So stay, give me your name. And I'll send it to an email, to the text support, we'll send it right away, you can find it, or I'll mail it to you.
Is there any data on versus the contamination?
So good question, is there any depth, any information on the depth of the wells versus contamination? And the answer is no. I will tell you that some of the ones I know are shallow. Some of the deeper ones do, but we don't always have the information about how deep somebody's well is. So we, when I tested the other 93 wells that I tested before this, that was one of the things I always did. I tried to find the well log, I tried to find how deep it was. And of course, I was going to be really smart. Then I would know, yes, it looks like it came from here when somebody asked me. But I will tell you that this is because it's through the cracks and the crevices and they travel different ways. It's not as easy as you would think. And even with these 155, I'm still not smart enough to answer that question without a lot of additional. Well, the board is protected, but that doesn't work when you're in rock and water stuff. And we have some interesting things. We actually have people's wells that flow. Okay, so that's the flow of the surface. Just kind of different, takes different flow patterns. I just don't have a good answer for you. Yes.
So it's ones that tested high. Are they in a cycle?
Sorry.
The ones that tested high in a certain area?
No. That's one that. Is Just kind of answer your question. There. Places, the number of houses that we sampled on each of the roads, and I put, where. And on the other side, it tells you the number of locations with detection. So that number of wells had at least one PFAS in it. Might have been lower than this 4 thing. It might have been. Like on National Road, it still had one. It had something in it. Had something in it. So that kind of gives you an idea that literally they're everywhere.
Well, one thing that you can see what if they are like certain roads that have it, it's because everybody got tested. Then we had certain other roads, no one signed up for testing, that's why we'd like to get the additional data point.
Right.
And the more of the information we have, is we're trying to get funding, we need that information.
And yet, Mike has said it, but. It says you put a water line. Give you a good deal on funding. Because I know, for example, that the city of Dayton has the problem with their one plant that feeds the south part of Dayton. And they've already applied for dollars to be able to take that PFAS down and look how many people that would benefit. Okay, so, are they going to give you $4 million to benefit 100? With everybody right now, because this is the new on the block.
Like probably aren't there yet.
So everything, so right now. Haven was talking about the contingency plan. It is a little bit on that water contamination page. We're gonna work on getting information and the most up-to-date information. We're gonna put that to the top, so you don't have to scroll down and look for it. So we'll get that done probably first of the week next week, and that'll be much easier to navigate. There's a lot of information there. It needs cleaned up. We tried to just kept on putting everything we had up there, but we know it needs to be cleaned up. And the slides will go to. Yes.
If, you brought up the letter today, that you got today, I got one too. Does that mean that I'm in the higher?
Yes, you're in one of the 36 that has something that would exceed, that exceeds that 4 number or that hazard index if those numbers become applicable. And just remember, if you look back at your data, you all have that 23-page report, okay? Which I always tell you, look at the 1 page. So go back and find it. I'll tell you what page to look at. If you have a PFOA or a PFOS that's higher than 4, you would have gotten that letter. Okay, and if you have further questions, you guys, I've gotten a lot of calls from you guys. You know, you have my business card. Call, I'll answer your questions.
So those numbers have changed 0?
The goal is 0 for PFOS and PFOA. And a health risk number is 0.004. Okay,
And keep in mind, that's the federal government. Like the state of Michigan, their number was 5, ours is 8. So it's gonna be completely across the United States. They're gonna set that number for everybody.
One of the things said nobody took advantage of the Allwood pipeline that lives on Martin.
No.
Single person.
So it'd be marketing.
well, no, but it's not a good argument when you go and get funding.
Be less expensive just to have the water system remediated with the reverse osmosis than to run through pipelines in everybody's house and they pay a monthly water bill.
That's where I think.
Remember. Now, you can get the systems now. So what I have to say, if you didn't hear what Cayman said, there's one word that you need to pay attention to, and that's maintenance, maintenance, and maintenance. Because if you don't take, unlike when you have having to test for these things and they can't deliver and they test all the time and they have to do this. And they will take the system away from them. You, when you get tired or you just don't have the extra money that Cara talked about, you know, this year, well, we'll let that go because I need to fix my car or I need to fix my roof or whatever. If there's anything else that you'll do. And I wanted to okay, and remind yourself that the most important thing you will do is maintain that system. And so a lot of times that's the thing that holds up funding for things like that because it relies on every single person being responsible every single day. And sometimes when it's just you, you're not as responsible as maybe as if you have kids or if you have grandkids or if you just say, I'm going to drink bottled water instead. So don't take that wrong, but it's the way that the perception is out there.
Well, there's a cost to this stuff too.
Yeah.
The bottled water.
I got him first. He's had his hand up longer.
Linda, is there a successful procedure for engaging in some sort of investigation of a company that is suspected of contaminants?
Okay, so the question is, there is a successful procedure for investigating companies that you might suspect are a potential source of perfluorinated compounds? And the answer is A, if it's regulatory or whatever, then they steps in. Okay, so they're your first line of defense normally is your EPA. Okay, if it's under certain laws, like a Superfund law, it goes to the US EPA. If it's not, it goes to the Ohio EPA. If you're not happy with the actions of Ohio EPA, then you've heard, you file suits, you get an attorney, you get experts, okay, that either get data or go gather data or get data out of depositions. I will tell you it's a long process as well, okay? And I will tell you what I told a water system that decided to go that way. And I said, you should decide how you'll know when you've won. Because you don't win on the things that you think you would think would be right. Okay, attorneys win on technicalities and your case is lost on the technicality. And so I asked this water system, I said, what is your goal? Well, I want it out of my well field. I want the ground cleaned up. And I said, probably not going to win that. Would you like to think of something else that you would think you won when the case was closed? I said, how about clean water for your customers? But the well field stayed dirty. Is that a win? And they thought long and hard about that. But 7 years later, is how they won. Water for their customers, but their well field still contaminated. So anytime you go to court, you need to decide before you ever go what you think is reasonable to win. Because unless you can make yourself go there, you won't ever be successful. So US EPA, Ohio EPA, if you can't get them to do what you want, and I've been on the side of a lot of suits, okay, then you sue, all right? And you go there, and that's how all this started. You guys have probably seen the movie Dark Waters, the Hollywood blockbuster with Mark Ruffalo and Anne Hathaway. It's good. Tells how an attorney stuff became hooked because his grandmother said this guy should talk to him and his cows were dying.
You know, that attorney today works for the Ohio EPA.
No, that attorney today works for the same company that he worked for, Tass, Titinius, and
Yes, but
Hutchinson.
they represent Ohio EPA.
That may be true.
Well, he personally told me that.
Okay. I know Rob personally. Okay, I like him. I sat in a lot of meetings with him in Washington.
Still with the same firm in Cincinnati.
He is,
but
and he's a
his-
pretty, he's a
his
pretty
firm
straight shooter.
represents Ohio.
Yes. Okay. Straight shooter. This man, I promise next. Yes.
If I hire you to come test my well, I get my results, give me a number, or you just tell me if I'm above the 4 level?
When I tested people's wells, I gave them a 23-page report from the laboratory, which told them every QAQC thing that the laboratory did. And that's what everybody got that was tested under this as well.
So if we, we kind of get tested for we're selected, but we still ain't get tested. How do we do?
It's my understanding, let me just go back here. It's my understanding that the township is going to expand the area that was tested. They're gonna test that blue area. Are you in the blue? Yeah, well, it's in the blue area. First, you should be in the blue area. So if they're a little bit patient until they decide get their funding stuff set up, they will have somebody come and test your well for free. And they will send you whatever it is that is agreed to in the contract, okay? If you want it done before that, I'll give you my business card and I'll come, but it's not cheap and the prices have gone up. So I can't fix the lab prices, okay? And they're up a lot because they're getting ready to test all these public systems. Yeah.
Well, the thing that concerns me is not only the maintenance of this substance, but your wastewater that you're putting back in your ground.
So use carbon. If you don't like reverse osmosis, use carbon. Remember, there are approved carbon things that have been tested. Okay, and they're on that website, all right? And the National Sanitation Foundation has tested. So these companies pay to have their things tested, and then they can have a stamp that says, oh yeah, it'll get it out. Yeah, so Cara will tell you her system that she has now has success. She has a carbon system. Okay, and it takes it out.
It's 2 large filters of like 5 quart, so they're almost as big as me. And there's 2 of them and a pre-filter. And we paid Stevenson Plumbing, they're a local plumbing company, to install our system. And yeah, and we've had it tested. Linda came and tested after the filtration system and we had 0 PFAS. And then another time we tested and we found the breakthrough on the first filter. So there's duality, right? Once the first filter is full and saturated, you have a dupe. So it's not gonna get through. So she tested in the middle. Once we knew that one was bad, we ordered a new filter from North American Aqua for about $750. And then they moved that. Then you just shift. You put your secondary in your primary position, put your new filter in the secondary position, and you just keep doing that. Our water usage is very high at home. I mean, 2 kids and a husband, and so we're just doing a lot of laundry, a lot of. But for the rest of you, we have to change like once a year. The rest of you may not have to change your filters nearly as often. So you have to change that filter at 100. It's recommended. I mean, you don't have to, but at 100,000 gallons, which is a lot of water.
So to me, there's like a meter that will tell you how many gallons.
And they installed that too. So it's a full system. Right here, our pump and our stop, all in our utility, and yeah. So it's been extreme. I'm very happy. Our water actually does taste better than it did. This is my water. I make my own filter now, so I don't put that in that either. And I find it to be very effective, but it was very.
Cara was one of the very first people that I ever sampled. Right after Allwood had a problem, there were 4 people from this area that called me. I kind of put them together to try to save them some money because it's so expensive. And she was one of the ones that's been monitored the longest. So she has good experience. Yeah, yes. Yes, have I tested the water after it went through the system? Yes, that was how we knew that the one filter was wearing out before it went to the next one, and she needed to order a new one so that she could do that. Did I test it once or twice?
We tested several times.
Yeah.
It's hard to remember now. I don't know if our system is up on the township page. American Aqua, but no, I don't think so. Okay.
But maybe not. Just have to look in the contingency plan and see if it's an NSF approved or if FERC tested it. Because, it doesn't have to have NSF to do it, but I will tell you this, if you don't mind, she did have a carbon filter before.
Yeah.
On this one, and we tested after that one, and that one did not take it out.
It was a tiny, like, this big. Like probably a lot of you have a sediment filter because, our wells are right coming up. We had a sediment and then a little one. And just with our usage, it's definitely not enough. So the breaks through that smaller carbon filter. Yeah.
Another concern, there's 2 other things to look at. One is that city water isn't always the best water to drink. So a lot of people filter their water, but they drink city water. Right? And I would do that. I might mitigate for everything anyway. The other thing is that the filters take out PFAS, but there are a lot of other contaminants that I would like to know which one's the best for, like arsenic and fluoride and heavy metals and things. So that
So the standard that I talked about, NSF Inside 53 drinking water unit health effects is rated. Just take out 50 something contaminants, and you can be approved for only one of those under that standard. But carbon is capable of taking out many contaminants. And if you want a filter that's certified to take them out, you can go on their website and look at on the right side of this table that's terribly difficult to read. They make a claim, and at the top, lead is always the first one on that list if they claim for lead, but some filters would only pay for the PFO or PFAS test. So there's filters that can be certified for up to 50 different contaminants. You can find that list of contaminants on the website, and I can't rattle off all 50.
Carbon is not the best thing for heavy metals necessarily. It will take out just organics.
generally speaking, you said that already takes out PFAS.
Well,
But generally speaking,
and RO and carbon will both work very effectively as long as you choose a carbon that's the right kind of carbon. Okay, and the only way that is to either have it tested or have data mean, even if these companies don't have, they're not approved by NSF, if they've got data that they've got a study where it takes out PFAS, you can look at that as well. Okay, I mean, we're not here just marketing NSF. That's the approved, tested, safe way, but I'm not going to tell you that there aren't other companies that maybe don't meet those standards. Okay, and I will also tell you that I've been working down along the Ohio River for 20 years, and what DuPont did when they contaminated everybody's private well up to public water, because these are rural systems, they put in GAC carbon. So there's a lot of data over 20 years for how long a house with X use of water, you know, but again, it depends on how much iron. Water, it will foul carbon. So if you have your water softener and then your carbon, you're taking your iron out because you don't want, you know, that's what you use right out for. You don't want it in your clothes, or, you know, you don't want to taste it. So it depends on how you do these things. Okay. Someone, yes.
So I live on 5. How often do you recommend to have it?
That's a good question. I will tell you that the Ohio Department of Health tested, and the 49 wells that they tested, they only found 5 that had PFAS in them. Of the 93 that I tested, some of those are in the pink area, some of those are in the blue area, and some are outside. Okay. But what I did was just take a look and see if you had it before, do you still have it now? Okay, because I had access to that data, and the only people's data I ever shared were ones that I asked the people if I could share them. Okay.
That's fine. If mine, when I had 3 well tests, they're clean today.
Yeah.
But so that's why, I mean, I personally am a believer of the system, because then I can control water coming in my house. I'm relying on somebody else telling me something else.
I'll be honest, it's a question that is very hard to answer when you don't know exactly what it is for what's called the travel time. Okay. But I can tell you what I've seen. What I've seen is the ones that I tested a year or so ago. They had it, they still have it, and the ones that didn't have it again. So that doesn't mean that that's the case for everybody. I can just tell you what I've seen.
Yeah, water has fluoride in it too. Want fluoride?
Well, not all fluoride is bad. Okay, so there is a level. We actually, municipal systems add fluoride. Okay,
That's what I'm saying.
but it's not just fluoride. Yes, it's not. And there is natural fluoride, by the way, and there's natural fluoride so high that it'll have all the bad things. It'll wobble your teeth, and et cetera, et cetera. But you know,
It's a trust issue, though, I think what he's saying. Do you trust the city of Union? Do you trust the city of Dayton? Do you trust the city of Vandalia to give you water that's safe? Or do you trust yourself with a system that you can control?
again, that's options.
Well, this slide deck could be another one.
Okay. It's longer than, I don't know if the office is closed or what. Anybody has, questions, I'm sure that we'll all be around here for a little while. I'd like to thank everybody who gave up to come listen. Yes, welcome.